Sean Hannity, everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing, if somebody would call Sean Hannity. I spoke to Sean Hannity, everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing, if somebody would call Sean Hannity. I spoke to Sean Hannity, everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing, if somebody would call Sean Hannity. I spoke to Sean.
And this is the Fourth Branch Project, the first and only program which is dedicated exclusively to those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Welcome to the Fourth Branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening.
The symbol of our freedom, the symbol of our democracy, has been eroded for the past few decades. For the past 2 years, however, the existence of a country which leads the world, the existence of a country which the world looked up to for guidance, has but become a thing of the past. Yes, it has something to do with the presidency of Donald Trump, but Mr. Trump is not solely fully responsible for the problem. The past 2 years, the legislative branch was fully controlled by one political party, the Republican Party, all the members of which chose voluntarily to relinquish the duty for which they were elected, all of which took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. If there is one thing that the past 2 years has taught us, is that the Constitution has flaws and has weaknesses that we cannot just simply ignore, which must be fixed. You see, the framers of the Constitution did foresee that we may at some point in the existence of the Republic have in the Oval Office a rogue president, an incompetent president, someone who's simply not up to the job as we have today. But they never anticipated that we would have a legislative branch controlled by a single political party, with all the members decided not to uphold the Constitution of the United States. As such, it becomes necessary, it becomes urgent for we, the people, to demand some changes into our Constitution. Members of the legislative branch are supposed to represent the views of the constituent. As we've seen the past 2 years, the Republican Party leaders, members of both Congress and the Senate, did many things that the constituent had opposed. And yet, during the 2018 midterm election, many chose to send those same members back to Washington. America is indeed in crisis. The question which remains is, will there be someone, anyone, or will there be enough patriots to walk the chamber of Congress and the Senate to straighten this predicament the country finds itself in? I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social, political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then. The level of ignorance of a people is the most accurate gauge to determine the strength of democracy in that country. It is baffling as to why Republican leaders, pundits, networks have worked so hard for the past few decades to continue the dummification of the Republican constituent. As we explore the core values, or what is conceived as the core value, or what remains as the core value of the Republican Party, and also take a very deep look at the situation of race relation in America, we continue today our conversation to bring you enough detail in order to help perfect the union. Don't go anywhere. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. One, to bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. Two, to expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. Three, to extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. To solve any problem, no matter what the problem is, whatever field it is in, there are three major important factors which must be present. Otherwise, it would be a futile exercise to even attempt a solution for that problem. Now, the three main factors that must be present, must be understood is, number one, the problem must be acknowledged, identified, so to speak. Unless one recognizes we're talking about a problem, then we cannot bring a solution to that problem. And second, the problem must be understood. Remember Ebola? A few years ago, there was an outbreak of Ebola, and the world, the scientific world, was racing trying to understand the disease, because without an understanding of the disease, there could be absolutely no solution. And three, which is also a major important aspect, is communication. Imagine for 1 second everybody who was exposed rather to Ebola, or people were at risk and people were sick, decided to stay silent. Even if a cure was found, there would be no way to eradicate the problem. So those three factors must also be present no matter what the situation we're talking about. As such, solving racism in America also requires that we put those three main factors in play. One, it must be acknowledged. As of date, it is one of the most difficult aspects of solving racism in America because different groups have different level of acknowledgement. Some in the black circle, it is not difficult at all because blacks experience the problem on a regular basis. But in the white circle, depending on where they are, depending on their social status, depending on their belief, depending on their knowledge, they may have different understanding of racism in America. As such, there is an effort that must be made in order for that first major point to be taken care of. Of course, without the first major aspect, the first factor, the second factor becomes also a little bit more difficult, is to understand the problem. Now, granted, for the past few decades, there has been some progress in factor number one, which means it started becoming a little bit more widespread, that people start understanding that indeed that there is racism in America. But one thing that comes and try to model the issue is the fact that there is the white nationalist, the white supremacist, and any other group that pretty much comprises individuals who are on the fringe who profess or trying to spread a message that seems to be outrage. Now, both blacks and white resort to those groups in order to have any discussion about racism. Now, let me set the record straight. Racism in America is not widespread because of the white nationalists, the white supremacists, or the KKK member, or any other such group. They are those who make the most noise, but they are in the minority. In other words, when we're talking about racism in America, we're not talking about those individuals. So needless to waste the time in trying to fix that problem, because in any society, we will always have element of that society that you would consider either bad, extreme. As such, the solution to the problem doesn't lie in removing white supremacists or white nationalists or KKK members or members of any such group. Now, I am not at all concerned about any individual racist, whether a member of white nationalists or white supremacists or KKK. I'm not at all concerned about any such individual. Not because they belong to a small group, to the minority, but rather because they do not impact my life in any way, shape, or form. What I am most concerned about as a black individual is institutionalized racism. It is a reminder that we're talking about solving race relation in America. And the topic at this point we are debating is slave trades, and we are at the point of rebellion. This is part 5 of Rebellion. But as it is every day, we provide a reminder as to what this program is about and where we're heading with the program. Now, in order to understand the whole situation of racism, discrimination in America, we had to take a look back in the past in order to understand how we get to where we're at today. because it is still baffling to most, especially blacks, that mid-21st century racism, discrimination still rampant in our society. Now, what remains to be understood is why. Why are we still talking about it? Why are we still coping with it? As mentioned earlier, me in particular, would not be concerned that my neighbor next door is racist, or the person I meet at the supermarket or on the train, racist. Does not impact my life in any way, shape, or form, but institutionalized racism does. And that's what we will talk about briefly before we continue the conversation about slave trades, the rebellion. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. Institutionalized racism. Now, racism, everybody understands what that is. It is the behavior, the action, and even the thought of one individual towards another, which is based exclusively on physical aspect, external factors, skin color, for instance. But institutionalized racism is a system which nurtures, condone, or even promotes racist behavior, action, and languages. For instance, the President of the United States, the current President of the United States, is an example of such. An individual, the most powerful individual in the nation, using the pulpit office in order to provide legitimacy to racism. Now, this is not just one individual. Institutionalized racism, such, for instance, which an example I provided before, which we will continue to provide other example as we move towards that aspect of the conversation, that, for instance, a few months ago, Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, tried to put on the federal bench an individual, a judge who is racist in North Carolina. This is how institutionalized racism works. You have someone who is overtly a racist, practicing it locally. Now you take that individual and you put on the federal bench now to practice it at federal level. So we see it everywhere. It's on the street. It's at the supermarkets. It's on the train. The judge, when you go to a courtroom, the judge rules differently if it's a black versus a white, and so on and so forth. A black and a white apply for a job. The black would not get it, not because he's not qualified, but because he is black. This is what institutionalized racism does. As such, it is a system which impacts blacks in big ways and cannot be ignored. Now, where did that come from? People are not born racist. You look at babies, you can put all of them together of all races or race together. There would not be any sentiment of race or racism. Racism is a taught behavior. At some point in life, we were passed certain pieces of information, certain behavior that make us what we are today. So the racists did not come out of their mother's womb racist. They were taught by parents, by environment, and they become later, they practice it, they nurture it, and they have the environment to help keep that particular type of behavior alive. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I couldn't care less if my neighbor is racist. But when the behavior of a racist make it such that it helps to institutionalize racism, that's when it becomes a problem to resolve. The question still, where does that come from? That's where we take a look back in the past. Yesterday, we talked about a very specific individual. That was Gabriel Prosser, and we already showed that he tried to overthrow the whole system of slavery in Richmond, and it didn't go well. Team that he gathered, team that he prepared, he planned for in order to escape. Unfortunately, a few of those slaves didn't feel comfortable going along with the plan, so they put the words out. Authority moved in. Gabriel Prosser, along with all the other leaders, were captured and killed. Now, it is a part of the story that we will come back to later on in order to make a very important point about how it is always fitting in conversation for whites to accuse blacks of violent and criminal, and yet nowhere in the conversation is it ever occurred that they had committed, at least their parents, their great-grandparents, their ancestors had committed the most heinous crime on blacks. I want you to keep that in mind because we will come back to that at some later time. So Gabriel Prosser was gone, and now Denmark Vesey. Now Denmark Vesey, we started to talk about him right after Gabriel Prosser. He was a former slave. He purchased his freedom. Now Gabriel Prosser was born in 1775, and in 1800, just barely 24 years old, he already had a plan organized in order to put an end to slavery, or at the very least, escape slavery. Now, I mentioned before, when we talk about slavery, most individuals tend to think it's just a flowery word expression, as if, oh my God, it was so bad that blacks were made slaves. It is not a simple word. It is not just as simple as that. The amount of the horror, the horrific action that were inflicted on black need to be told over and over in order to understand where they came from and why blacks up to today, they have this type of reaction whenever they come face to face with situation similar to what was going on during slavery. So slavery is not just a term to gloss over as if, well, it is over, then let's not talk about that anymore. So Gabriel was, along with other leaders, 25, 26 other leaders, Gabriel Prosser did manage to escape and went to Norfolk, Virginia, but again, he was captured there and they executed him along with 26 others. And of course, the slave that participated in that uprising, we're talking about the underling, those were also punished, physical punishment, but they survived. That happened in 1800. Now, it so happened that Denmark Vesey purchased his freedom in 1800. So he works for a slave owner by the name, well, not the name, he was called Captain Vesey, and that's the person that Denmark purchased his freedom from in 1800. And he learned carpentry. That particular story happened in South Carolina. Now with Gabriel Prosser, it happened in Richmond, Virginia. So Denmark Vesey purchased his freedom, and both the white community, the white slave owners, were making use of him because they thought, oh, great, fantastic. He's a black guy, as it's happening today, even up to today. He's a black guy who purchased his freedom. We can use him so that we can tell the other black slave, well, to just take it easy, don't do anything bad, just accept your fate, accept your punishment, and at some point you'll be able to purchase your freedom as well. So that's the way white slave owners saw Denmark Vesey as the perfect solution to the problem. Because in all fairness, because there started to be a lot of small little uprising in the group of slaves started to push back because nobody would accept being enslaved and being forced labor for 18 hours a day continuously without pushing back. So yes, as time went by, they start pushing back. Now, without even touching the slave for a moment, anyone with a slight level of decency who would wake up one day and say, gosh, what are we doing? Why are we mistreating those people that way? No, they did not see that. They went to church. They were churchgoers. They have great family that went to school. They purchasing lands and houses, and things were going great. But no one seems to have any decency to think for 1 second, this is wrong. Of course not. But blacks are the criminals. Now, they knew it was wrong because there were a bunch of whites, especially not in the South, that were against that, or were preaching against that were fighting against slavery. So whites in the South, white slave owners, knew that what they were doing were wrong. Abraham Lincoln, the same gentleman that signed the Emancipation Act to free the slavery, he said, as I would not be a slave, I would not be a master. He wasn't a slave owner, nor were his parents. So whites understood what they were doing were wrong. But they did it anyway. But today, the only story we're hearing is blacks are criminals. Blacks are violent. But their stories about the kind of treatment inflicted on blacks, those stories just disappear, never make it to light, because they suppress those stories and they just present blacks. And I'm going to show you why the story of blacks are criminal become part of the conversation in the white circle. Now, if you're watching this for the first time, I have to take a step back and remind you once again We are well aware of the fact that there are two groups of whites in this country. There are those who are racist and who discriminate. And there are millions of those individuals. And there are those who are not racist, who do not discriminate. And there are also millions of those individuals. And there lies the big problem of race relation in America, because this group is divided in terms of their understanding, in terms of how they relate to blacks, in terms of how they interact with blacks. Same situation during slavery. There were a group of whites who wanted slavery as being really part of life because it helps to enrich them, to give them stature. And there were a group of whites who knew and fought against slavery because they know it was wrong to do. So we still have the exact same predicament today, because there are two groups of whites: those who are still fighting to keep institutionalized racism around, and there are those who are fighting to end racism in America. But not talking about it is not going to make it go away, because we have not been talking about it for centuries now, and we still have that as widespread in America. Now, back to slavery, the rebellion. Denmark Vesey purchased his freedom from Captain Vesey. He served him, he slaved with him, for him for 20 years. So according to historical record, he purchased his freedom and he learned carpentry, and he was doing well for himself. In fact, history said that he was doing great. He had a great life in terms of beyond slavery, that is, in terms of how his life, he had a house, he pretty much had a good life. But one thing that Vesey had that we don't find in a lot of blacks here today is the fact that despite his success beyond slavery, he could have picked up and left the South. He could have, because he had no business in the South anymore. He was no longer a slave. He had a trade that he was doing well with, and that was bringing him really stature, not as much as the whites at that time, because blacks were never considered equal to whites. But for sake of conversation, he was doing fine. So he could have just left the South so that it could be someplace in the North where blacks were welcome and blacks could strive. But Denmark Vesey had a much higher call. He found it necessary for him to do something against slavery. He used